Good morning and welcome. It's 11 a.m. and we're going to get started. So I am Kristen Nessenden. I'm the Director of Community Relations for the Histiocytosis Association. And I have the pleasure of welcoming you to part 4 in our Beyond the Office Visit virtual education series. Today's topic is navigating clinical trials for Histio. Pardon me. Before I introduce today's host of the webinar, I would like to go over just a few important housekeeping items. Today's presentation is for informational purposes only, and we encourage you to discuss your specific circumstances with your care team. There will be a question and answer after the presentation, and we encourage you to ask questions. However, due to time constraints, we may not be able to get to all of them, but we will provide contact information at the conclusion of the webinar. Today's webinar is being recorded, and it will be shared out with all attendees in a follow-up email in the coming days. As I mentioned, there will be time for questions. You'll use the Q&A feature in the webinar panel to type your question and read others. I encourage each of you to familiarize yourself with that the toolbar, and within there, you'll click on the Q&A and it'll open up a window. That's where you'll type your question. We also encourage you to read the questions that other attendees have entered, and you can hit the like button to upvote them. That way it'll let the panelists know the most popular questions first. So in addition to the Q&A, there is a chat window. We will use the chat window to answer questions that the speaker may ask of the attendees or to address any technical issues. Just like to remind everyone to, if you have questions for the panelists, to add your specific questions in the Q&A. The chat will just be kind of to introduce yourselves to each other. It's just a place of community. So with that, I'd like to ask everybody to give it a try and let us know where you're joining us from today. And if you'd like to enter to share with us what histiocytic disorder is what you're most interested in. I hope everyone is finding it, but we're just going to move ahead, and I'm going to introduce today's host. And today we have, it is my pleasure to introduce, I should say, today's host, Jessica Corcoran, the Executive Director of the Erdheim-Chester Global Alliance, Diana Fournier, the Executive Director of the Histiocytosis Association, and April Duda, the past President and Director for the Histiocytosis Association of Canada. Jessie?
Yes, thank you, Kristen. It's so good to have everyone here. We're very happy to have Brenna on as our guest webinar speaker today. And what we do at the ECD Global Alliance is we work to educate and raise awareness for ECD specifically, and we support patients and family members that are affected by erdheim-chester disease specifically. And our grants program actually supports ECD and other adult histiocyte research. And we also partner with the Histio groups to bring educational webinars with knowledgeable speakers like this one. And for this webinar, we hope that you get to learn more about the clinical trial, how we work with clinical trials between the advocacy groups and the investigators, what we do to link you guys with the trials. Hopefully we simplify the process for you, answer any questions you have. It's important to talk to your doctors about any of the questions you have, or if you're interested about a trial, just speak to your doctor about those. We encourage you to share the list of open trials that are available to you. And even if you're not interested in them, they may help some patients that are also affected by histio disorders that they also see. So we encourage you to do that as well. So everything will be emailed to you at the end of the session, but we hope you stay on and ask some questions at the end. So I will pass this on to April with the Histiocyte Association of Canada.
Thank you, Jessica. Good morning, everyone. Well, it's morning in Ontario, Canada. That's where I am located. And my name is April Duda. I am past president director of the Histiocytosis Association of Canada. Our goal, and is similar to all our associations, I believe, that we really want to reach out to patients and family support. Awareness is a huge focus for us. Education to our members and as well to doctors and the medical professions. Fundraising is also a big focus for our organization, as it is for everybody, so that we can fund fantastic things like today's webinar, clinical trials and research and what have you. And through these supports and through fundraising, we are able to make donations to support the various ongoing trials and research and what have you. I've been involved since 1995 on and off. I had a 3-year-old daughter that passed away from LCH at the age of 3. And it blows my mind how far we have come with this disease. And it's solely from the dedication of the medical professions and the fundraising and the research that has happened and the treatments. And I'm just amazed at how far the treatment process and everything has gone in histiocytic disorders. And we welcome you to join the Canadian Association if you're in Canada or anywhere else. We love to hear from everybody. Now I'll pass it over to Deanna. Thank you.
Thank you, April. Thank you, Jesse. And thank you, Kristen, as well. We're really thrilled to have Brenna here as our speaker today. My name is Deanna. I'm Executive Director of the Histiocytosis Association and also a former LCH patient. So I've been part of the association through most of my life and seen the tremendous work that has been done to raise awareness, to create programs for education and emotional support, and then all of the ways that we participate to fund research and partner with researchers that are leading us ever closer to better treatments and cures. So it's an honor to be here. And I just want to note the amazing partnership between the ECD Global Alliance, the Histio Association of Canada, and the Histio Association. It's just wonderful to partner together to offer you opportunities like this and lots of other things that we're doing for the good of the community. So thank you for being here. And I am going to introduce our speaker for the day for navigating clinical trials for Histio. We are so grateful to Brenna O'Brien and her team at Jason Carter Clinical Trials Search and Support. Brenna is a senior clinical trials patient navigator, and she was a bone marrow transplant patient navigator in the Be the Match Patient Support Center prior to joining the Jason Carter Clinical Trials Search and Support Program. Brenna also worked as an inpatient RN, so a nurse, on the adult blood and marrow transplant unit at the University of Minnesota. She has a Master of Public Health degree from the University of Minnesota and a Bachelor of Science in Nursing from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. She is also certified as an oncology nurse navigator, and we've worked very closely with her over the last several years and know how amazing of a job that she and her team do at supporting patients through clinical trials, which can be really confusing and challenging topics. So without further ado, Brenna, thank you so much. It's exciting to turn it over to you, and we appreciate your time.
Yes, thank you, Deanna. I appreciate that nice introduction, and I'm looking forward to speaking with you all today. I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen. Are you seeing anything on your end? Okay, I think everyone's muted, but I'm seeing some changes on my end. I'm just going to make sure I switch to the presenter mode. How's that looking, Deanna?
All set. Looks great.
All right. Wonderful. Well, then I'll get started then. So looking forward to speaking to you about navigating clinical trials and the clinical trial space, just some one-on-one on how to do that. And I can let you know my work. So working at the Jason Carter Clinical Trial Surgeon Support Program, that's actually a program through Be the Match. So Be the Match runs the National Bone Marrow Registry for patients that are looking for a donor who are interested in the blood and marrow transplant process. So we're housed within Be the Match, but specifically working with patients with blood cancers or other blood disorders that are interested in clinical trials and just hoping to help navigate that process and eventually enroll should they be interested in a trial. And I'll preface my presentation today by saying that I work primarily with patients in the US and understand the trial landscape here best, but I still will try to show various ways in which international patients can access clinical trials or learn more about their options as well. And learning objectives for today being just a general clinical trials overview. What are they? How does it work? Going into patient rights and safety. We want to talk about the benefits to a patient as well as the costs associated with trials. I'll do a brief intro into how to perform a search if you were interested in that, and then end with some additional resources. I'll start by grounding us all in what a clinical trial is. So trials are research studies that explore whether a medical procedure, therapy, or device is safe and effective to treat a specific condition or disease. They're the only way drugs or therapies can gain Food and Drug Administration or FDA approval, which is why they're so important here in advancing the science of medicine. And trials are the way in which we advance science and provide more treatment options for future patients. Clinical trials follow strict rules to keep patients safe. In the US, at least, trials are checked by the Office of Human Research Protections and the Food and Drug Administration, as well as an Institutional Review Board, or IRB. They also watch each clinical trial very closely. The OHRP provides leadership in the protection of the rights, welfare, and well-being of human subjects involved in research conducted or supported by the US Department of Health and Human Services. And trials can be shut down at any time to protect the people in it. The trial will be stopped if there is any unexpected harm, such as dangerous or unexpected side effects. An IRB is a committee made up of those who have training in scientific areas, those who have expertise in non-scientific areas, and also members of the community who may represent people who would participate as subjects in the studies. This group review serves as an important role in the protection of the rights and welfare of people. And an IRB has the authority to approve, require modifications in, or even disapprove research. They review a research protocol and related materials that patients see, like maybe brochures or consent forms, to ensure the protection of their rights. And the review is done before the study is allowed to start recruiting patients, as well as periodically throughout, to ensure that a study's design is safe and is ethical. And I will say that safety is really number one when it comes to trials. There are many guardrails. Any protocol goes through an IRB review before the trial starts, like we mentioned, but the board reviews it and sees if it's safe. You know, they're asking, are we harming people? Are we potentially being coercive? There's how many people are involved in the data monitoring committee. I mean, there's a lot of questions. And then once the trial opens, everything is monitored. So every visit, every blood draw, everything reported by the patient that they're experiencing. A whole team of people outside of a patient's immediate medical team are behind the scenes, reviewing all of the data, recording everything that happens. And they look, there's also that external committee too that looks over the data, because we know that internal people may be biased by those who are paying them. So there's both those external and internal folks that are constantly asking questions and monitoring the experience of a participant for their safety. And continuing with the talk about safety, in order to join a clinical trial, all patients will go through an informed consent process. Informed consent is just a written agreement by which a subject voluntarily confirms their willingness to participate. Before a patient agrees to join a trial, they'll meet with the study coordinator to go over what to expect. Individuals really have the right to learn about the trial in a way that they can fully understand, which is a part of this informed consent process. And the onus is on the team to make sure that they're doing a good job of that and meeting the patient and where they're at in their experience. This includes discussing the purpose of the trial and what the researchers want to learn, any potential benefits or harms that could be associated with participating, other treatment options that are currently or could be available to a patient, and how a patient's privacy will be protected. So for example, if they are collecting any genetic material or genetic panels, how that information would be stored and de-identified, and just how their privacy would be protected. All parts of the informed consent process. And as a potential research subject, you might be given an opportunity to read the consent document fully and to ask questions about anything you don't understand. So there's effort made to write these documents in plain language and go through them with you at your own pace, in your own language, and with anyone you want present in that room. So you can take your time in deciding what's right for you. There's no rules as far as when you have to make that decision or in what way. And the informed consent process for clinical trials is meant to give you ongoing information to help you make an educated decision about whether to join or to stay in a study. They'll also discuss your rights at this time, such as the right to refuse treatment or stop participation at any time. So you'll only be part of a clinical trial if you agree to join. And although it's important to note that signing an informed consent document is not legally binding. So you have the right to opt out or decline that consent at any time. Even if it's towards the end of the study, it's still within your rights to say that you're not comfortable continuing. The clinical trials process is designed to ensure that new treatments are better than existing therapies. And we know that there is inherently risk in all treatments for diseases, regardless of if one is in a trial or not. And also knowing about what phase a trial is can help you assess if the level of risk is something you're comfortable with or not. So you can see kind of in this image here, we have the 3 phases that you'll typically hear about with trials. And trials are really the final step in a long process that begins with research in a lab. So before any new treatment is ever used with actual people, researchers work for years to understand its effects on different cells and on animals in a lab. So I'll go through the different phases here of research as it can be helpful just in your decision-making process, starting with the phase 1 trials. The question they're really asking is the treatment safe? So the focus is on safety and toxicity levels at this time, and it includes a much smaller amount of participants. And when a phase 1 trial shows good results, it moves on to that second phase, or phase 2. Which is where we become even more concerned with efficacy or how well a treatment is working. So these phase 2 trials, they're asking the question, does the treatment work? The focus is on effectiveness. And then if the phase 2 trial shows good results, it moves on to that final phase 3. So at this point, we know it's safe and we know it's effective, but we're asking, is the treatment better than the standard treatments that are already approved or out there? This is when it, should it make it through the phase 3 trial, this is when it's approved by the FDA, meaning that other patients can get the treatment without being in that trial. And most of the time when you take part in a study, you'll only be in that one phase of the study. So treatments move through the phases, but patients do not. I'll also mention a couple terms here I included on the right, as we often hear these in the trial space. It can be helpful to know. So placebo and randomization. And for placebo, I'll start by saying that most trials for life-threatening diseases do not include a placebo in the way we often think about it as, I've heard it described as a sugar pill before. So instead, everyone will get treatment either with the already established standard of care or with the new treatment that's being studied. Trials are to answer a specific question about if a certain treatment works or not. But that doesn't mean that all patients won't still get appropriate care, as anything else would be unethical. For example, if in your clinical trial search you hear that it's a placebo-controlled trial, you can assume that the patient will either be placed in an arm or just a group of the study that's receiving the new intervention, or a group of the study that's getting the already approved standard of care. Placebo-controlled studies fall into the phase 3 category because they are comparing the new treatment to an existing treatment. Another buzzword that's often heard when talking about research is randomization. And randomization is just an electronic flip of the coin where you're randomly assigned to get either this new treatment or the current approved treatment. And often the trial is masked, meaning you and or your doctor won't know which group you're in until after the study is over. Just making sure that treatments are compared fairly and doctors or patients don't choose what group they want to be in or bring any bias to that. And this certainly does not apply to all trials. There's plenty that aren't like this, but it is something you can look out for or even ask questions about should a particular trial be of interest to you and you see these words used. So now that we've just really briefly gone over what clinical trials are and some basic concepts, I'll move on to how you would begin learning more about what trials could be available to you or to a loved one. And you're always allowed and even encouraged, I would say, to ask questions at any time. And if you're just interested in a clinical trial, you can use some of the questions on the slide here to begin that conversation with your physician or with your medical team. And it's totally appropriate to bring up trials at any point in your treatment trajectory. So it's not just reserved for those who have just been diagnosed or who perhaps have tried lots of treatments and are looking for something different. It's really appropriate to bring it up at any time, whether you have known about a disease since birth or you are just being diagnosed. And there's just a few examples of questions that could be helpful to bring up with your care team here. So, are trials a good fit for me currently? What trials are even available for my disease? How would I get enrolled? What do I need to qualify? Perhaps asking about if there are other trials available to a certain location that you're interested in particular. You know, these are just a handful of questions, but I know I will send out in the follow-up email, I'll include, we have a list on ctsearchsupport.org on our website under the Learn section. It's a great handout for what questions to ask your physician about clinical trials. And that's for people that are just starting to consider this versus people, or also for people that, you know, have a very particular trial in mind and they really want to answer get answers to questions that are much more detailed. So we have a long list of those that I'm happy to share. So now let's say you're planning to ask about clinical trials at your next appointment with your care team, but you're also interested in doing a little exploring on your own or just seeing what different studies are currently available in the meantime. So I'll talk through how you can perform your own search of what trials may be available to you or to a loved one. And the best place to start is the website listed here, clinicaltrials.gov. It's a web-based resource that provides patients, family members, but also healthcare professionals, researchers, and the public with easy access to information on both publicly and privately supported studies on a wide range of diseases and conditions. So all studies that are interventional, just meaning that people receive a treatment, that study, a drug or maybe a device, a biologic, they're required by law to be registered on the site. So studies in this database are conducted in all 50 states and in 220 additional countries around the world. These searches are constantly changing as trials open and close. So oftentimes using the search tool, you'll get a different result one day than you did the previous week, just because of the fact that trials are opening and closing all the time. So I'll just kind of talk through here how I would get started on a search. And I included a screenshot of what you'll see when you first go to that clinicaltrials.gov website. And you'll notice here there's these 3 input bars where you can type information to narrow that search. So searching by a specific condition, that's straightforward at the top. But then other terms could also include, like, let's say you heard or you've been reading or maybe heard a drug or medication name mentioned by somebody you know. Feel free to enter that in here if you're looking for that specifically. or even if you know of a particular physician who specializes in a certain condition that you're interested in, you can also include their name here as well, separated by commas. And then oftentimes you'll want to search an area that's particular to you. So you can enter the United States or any of those other 220 countries that will auto-populate here once you start typing. And then, for instance, if you put in the US, it'll also include you can choose a city that's close to you if you'd like to narrow it down by that. And then there's some advanced search options here, which if you want, can play around with those with age or past treatment history filters. But I think as long as you include the information here and click search, it'll be a great first start on what's currently open. I will, one other trick here to mention, I see in this at the very top that all studies is selected under the status. And if that's selected, when you click search with all your criteria typed in, then you'll see a long list of currently recruiting trials, but also trials that have already completed or were terminated. So it tends to be a really long list. So if you're interested in just narrowing it down to what is currently open or will soon be open to recruiting people, then I would choose that first option under status here, recruiting and not yet recruiting. And for example, I know I just checked yesterday, and currently there are 33 clinical trials within the US recruiting for the diagnosis of histiocytosis. You could get even more specific by searching LCH, and you'd get 17 results for that. So you can be as specific or broad as you want with the disease terms, and there is that auto-populate function in the dropdown for just helping with correct spelling too. So let's say you went to that page, you did a first search, and you now have a list of the trials for a particular diagnosis in a particular location. I'll talk through now how to interpret what you would see should you click into one of the studies that's listed under the search you just did. And before I do, I'll just put in a plug here that there's no need for engaging deeply in this process unless it's of interest to you. You know, if instead of wanting to wade through the information on the site, you can always simply mention to your doctor that you're interested in clinical trials and they can talk through what may be available to you. This slide will just be for if you'd like to explore what's available on your own or at other institutions, or even on your own timeline if you're just curious with keeping up with the research over time. I will also say to keep in mind that it's written for and by researchers and read oftentimes by physicians. So there's lots of medical jargon in there and lots of in-depth information. So they are going to, I believe it's in 2023, revamp their site and make it a bit more patient-friendly, which is certainly something we're all looking forward to. So we can keep our eyes out for that in the near future. But for now, we'll just focus on the various sections within a study listing that you'd find just to gain some general knowledge of how to interpret it, should you be interested in doing the search on your own. And as I say that, I'm thinking too, if you do the search on your own, it's oftentimes really great to, if something is of interest to you, to share that with your medical team, and you can reference the search that you've done too, just to further that conversation. So each page has the same layout that includes the sections listed here. When you click into the clinical trial listing, it starts with a brief, often few sentence summary of the trial, followed by a more detailed description of what the trial sets out to learn. Then if you keep scrolling down the page of the listing, there's a study design section. This section includes brief information on what kind of trial it is. For example, what phase is it? 1, 2, 3, if patients are randomized to different treatments or not, or even how many people they'd like to enroll. Next is the arms and interventions section. So it lists the different treatments that a patient will receive if they do enroll, and it will list the different medications that will be given. How they will be administered is also included. So for example, if it's in a pill form, if it's a medication or through an IV, how many times it will be given over a number of days, weeks, or months. That's all included there. And then next, I'd pay attention to the eligibility criteria section. It will list both inclusion and exclusion criteria, meaning just what a patient needs to have in their clinical history to join, or what would rule them out from joining. This often looks like a long, detailed list of bullet points that the study doctor would go through one by one in a patient's medical history to see if they are a good fit. And it includes things like the age range for joining, particulars of a diagnosis, like various mutations that must be present, if that's applicable, what treatments you must have already tried, or even specific lab values from your most recent blood draws, scans, or tests. And then finally, towards the end of each listing, there will be a section called Contacts and Locations. And this is where they'll list where the trial is located, including the name of the center or the hospital, the city, state, or country that the trial is located in. And they'll also list the name of the principal investigator, or just the head doctor who's leading the trial. It will have their email and sometimes phone number that you can use when expressing interest in joining. And for larger trials, often in later phases of study, you'll see many locations listed in different cities and even countries around the world. Other trials that are smaller or earlier on in their study will have only a handful of locations and contacts listed. In the rare disease space, it's not uncommon to see fewer contacts listed, as there may be only a handful of institutions or doctors specializing in a particular diagnosis or type of treatment, but that's not a rule, and it certainly all depends on the trial and how many people they are interested in recruiting and how broad of their criteria it is. And again, I'll emphasize you don't need to fully understand what's within each trial listing in order to get started. And simply mentioning to your team that you're interested in trials is always a great place to start. So there's often questions we get about financing and how that works within the clinical trial world. So before joining a trial, you'll learn what costs are billed to your insurance and which are covered by the trial. That's part of that informed consent process. Typically, the clinical trial sponsor will cover the cost of the drug or the treatment that the trial is studying, and all other care that would be considered routine. So that might be blood draws, labs, any additional medications or office visits. Those are billed to the patient's insurance. This means there's often still a cost associated with participating, but the biggest expense of the drug or the treatment is covered by the sponsor, whether that's a pharmaceutical company or through a public grant that was awarded to the researchers. And I did want to make a point to specifically call out the National Institutes of Health, or NIH, especially since there are some international folks on the call. The NIH is the only center in the US that accepts patients without US-based health insurance that aren't willing to pay for those extra costs of treatment and out-of-pocket costs. So this could apply to people who don't have insurance because maybe they're from another country and want to receive care in the US, or maybe they're undocumented without US-based insurance, for example. The NIH is unique in that it covers all costs associated with the trial a patient joins, including the treatment, but also the tests and even associated travel and lodging costs for the duration of the study and the follow-up period. It's located in Bethesda, Maryland. So if you're particularly interested in looking at what studies are recruiting patients here, you can always include the NIH or Bethesda, Maryland in that initial search using that search tool I showed you. And an alternative would be to just go to their website directly to see active trials, or I even included the Office of Patient Recruitment here. There's a toll-free number listed there where you can learn more about what's available to you and what clinical trials they're currently offering. And as we know, costs can be a large barrier to trial participation. So I'm excited to mention the Clinical Treatment Act. It's a new Medicaid provision that has helped to ensure access to trials for Medicaid patients in the US and may provide them with life-saving therapies for their disease. So as we covered, the sponsor typically covers the cost of the treatment or the drug they're studying, but there are those other extra out-of-pocket costs that can still prevent people from continuing or joining. So this new bill requires that state Medicaid programs cover these costs. And it's in It's for costs that are not covered by the trial sponsor, like we mentioned, that are providing for trials that are providing life-threatening condition treatments. And Medicaid insures nearly 1/5 of the US population, and it's the last major payer that was not required by federal law to provide coverage of the routine costs. And I'm excited to say, I think it was January that this bill went into effect, so should put trials within reach of many more patients. And before going into some additional resources, I'll just want to specifically call out some of the benefits to joining a clinical trial. You know, research can help the patient enrolling in a study, but also contribute to the health of future patients with similar diagnoses. We learn more about what good practices are and better treatments and regimens are for us through the study process. A clinical trial can also be a chance to see a drug type or treatment that patients may not otherwise have access to, as often they're still brand new. Little evidence suggests that patients participating in trials have worse outcomes on average than patients who are not treated in a trial. And some patients also could benefit from the opportunity to access greater treatment options, including the newest experimental therapies. Therefore, patients participating in a trial are likely to receive care that's at least as good as treatment administered outside of a trial. And if the investigational treatment works, perhaps even better. Furthermore, participants might benefit from receiving care administered according to high-quality trial protocols from a team of clinicians well-trained in the research process. There are a lot of eyes on someone in a clinical trial, say double or triple the eyes on the person going through the treatment. So they are under more surveillance and lots of attention to detail with the data collection processes. And often this means more visits and assessments and a longer follow-up period. Overall, this is a very personal decision. So weighing the risks and benefits, which are different for every person, even within the same trial, depending on their current state of health and comfortability with the protocol. So that's a conversation that can happen over time with your medical team, with those involved in the trial. And the first question can always just be, is there a trial for me? And your physician will be able to begin that conversation with you. So here's a slide about where I work, which is the CTSS program, or Jason Carter Clinical Trial Search and Support. As I mentioned before, it's housed within Be the Match. And here's a great photo of Jason here. He did pass away in 2016 at the age of 28 after a lengthy experience with leukemia. But he also participated in a number of clinical trials, which gave him more years spent with his family. And Jason's family really wanted to start this program as a way to help patients navigate some of the barriers and educate patients on how they can join clinical trials and have a bit of support or hand-holding throughout that process. So the goal really is to just help patients with blood cancers or other blood disorders to find and join trials and to answer questions and be a support throughout that process. The ways we do this is, I'll talk about the 4 ways we do this here on the slide, but first would just be our one-on-one support. So that's a clinical trial navigator like myself who can provide that one-on-one contact and support for patients or for their loved ones, answering questions. And we do this by email or by phone, so whichever you prefer. We also have our online search tool, which is an easy to use web-based search tool to find relevant trials. We do source directly from clinicaltrials.gov and then rewrite the trials into plain language, just giving the main points of the trial. So it's a bit more brief when you're searching through. And we also have educational resources to help understand new types of treatment, your rights as a patient, and even how to talk with your doctor, how to ask particular questions. And finally, we have our travel grant as well. So that's a financial assistance grant that helps pay travel costs associated with joining. Sometimes you may not have the ideal trial for you right in a location that's close and travel would be needed. So we want to kind of decrease that barrier to entry by providing this grant for any trial that isn't near home or even that will require airfare, lodging. We want to help with that. Okay, so thank you for your time and attention. I think at this point, we like to just open it up to questions and further discussion. And I will take a peek at the question and answer section here and stop sharing my screen. Okay. So I see, not seeing a lot in the Q&A, but I do remember we had some questions written in when people signed up for the webinar. So happy to go into that. I know one question we've gotten before and that was included was how will the data from the trials be shared with me? Which I think is a really great, important question that patients are understandably curious about. You know, how am I going to get the information if I do enroll? How will I know it's working? Or will I hear about the results after the study is done? And I know there's really been a movement towards sharing the data collected during a clinical trial back with patient participants. That hasn't always been the case, but there's been more of a push towards that just from an ethical perspective. If you wish, of course, it's an opt-in thing, so that you may better both understand the research and understand your place in it. So we know more like pharma companies are returning plain language clinical trial summaries to participants, which is a great start. So I always think it's great to ask, you know, during that informed consent process, but really at any time if you are involved in a trial, like what is the protocol for returning data to us? And they may mention that they have those summaries that they're willing to give should you be interested. You know, they're having to take into account different concerns about, especially in the rare disease space, you know, we want to make sure privacy is important and we don't want to run the risk of identifying any individual trial participants. So there are some legal requirements there with sharing back data, but you can ask about that. Sometimes there's an open access model while others have more of a controlled access model. Those are some words that's used. But great question to ask the team. And there is that push to increase the returning of data to patients. And this can either be in like an interim analysis that goes out before the study's done, or it could be at the end, returning the results to the patient, in addition to what typically happens, which is just publishing results at a conference for other healthcare professionals to see. See what else, what other questions are here. It's a question about how do rare diseases ever get enough candidates for a phase 1 protocol? Yeah, that's good. And if we remember back to the phase 1 trial, there are a lot smaller participant requirements for that, but that, you know, a trial can often be recruiting for a longer period of time. And I think we want to do a better job of working with disease organizations and making those partnerships with the physicians that are recruiting for their trial, just to better diversify the people that join the trial. I think, Deanna, you might have an answer to this as well, as indicated in the Q&A section, but to your point, it can take a while, and that's why it's great too if you see a study that's conducted at multiple trial sites. So it is casting that net a bit wider to hopefully include more patients at a quicker rate.
Brenna, thank you. The only thing I was going to add, and you might be able to speak to this too, is that through advocacy, I know that some of the requirements are starting to change for clinical trials, especially with consideration for rare disease populations. And so there are sometimes exceptions made where a trial can actually move through the phases with a much smaller population, depending on how rare the disease is and how the treatment protocols are set up. So through advocacy, there is some work being done to make a difference with that. I'm not sure if it applies to all or if that works for some of the histiocytic disorders that are in trials right now, but it's really neat to see some of those changes taking place.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think too, there's I'm muted there, sorry. I think it cut off, but great point that you made. I think there is a lot of work being done as well to look at that eligibility section criteria that we briefly talked about, and making sure that those criteria are really thoughtful and are appropriate specifically to the disease population. So sometimes in the past, we've seen that there can be a lot of extra criteria that might not be eligible for a smaller patient population and have just been kind of copied from previous protocols in. So really taking a deep look and pushing for the eligibility criteria to be expanded so that we're not ruling out people without a very particular reason.
Yeah, and I will just add that there are basket trials that actually include more patients than one single disease. So that's how we achieved our FDA approval for vemurafenib, was for those with a BRAF mutation. For they had lymphoma patients in the same trial, along with other patients. The ECD patients were actually one of the most successful in the trial, but it was a basket trial with different diseases within the trial. So they get creative as well. So I just wanted to add that.
Perfect. And otherwise, I think I am seeing the questions. We answered a lot of the questions. Anything else that anyone feels like we should bring up during this Q&A section?
Brenna, there's a question I know that came in, and I think it's been asked as well in some of the registrations. For those that are outside of the United States from other countries, I know you did touch on it, but would you mind reiterating how do they participate in trials, whether that be locally or otherwise?
Yeah, definitely. I would still, other than, of course, bringing it up with your medical team is the #1 way to get that conversation started. If you are wanting to search on your own, still use that clinicaltrials.gov site. Since you are able to look internationally, there will be that drop down for countries. You can include your country, and then if you further want to search by city, and you can include that there. So that's an option. And then also, should you be looking to travel to the United States, or you're interested in the options there, I would start with the NIH. You know, take a look at their site, take a look at their listings on the .gov site. There's that Office of Patient Advocacy phone number, and I should have included the email as well, but that's a good place to just see, is there anything right now that's recruiting patients? And certainly if not, you can check out over time, since they are, constantly opening and closing trials that may be applicable to you or a loved one situation.
Thank you. And I know you talked a little bit about how data is shared back with patients, but for those who maybe were participated in trials and are waiting to hear the outcomes, is there a way that they can find that out after they've enrolled?
Yeah, I would start, if you do still have the information, the contact information for the person who enrolled you. So that may be the principal investigator, it may be the trial physician, looking for a way to reach back out to them. And sometimes people have that offhand, but if it's been a while since you participated, I would just do a little search on there. They should have their contact information up on the .gov site. You can reach out to them that way. And I know even on the search tool, there's a way to search. If you have, the name of the doctor, you could search that way. Or if you only remember maybe the treatment that was used, you could search that way, and just make sure that you have the all studies toggle on in the search, so that can bring up past studies as well. So then you're able to at least get the contact information for the person running that study. I would say there, instead of doing some perhaps maybe other complicated ways of like finding patient summaries, you can do that. Just a Google search looking for what's already publicly available or what's been presented at journals or in conferences. But if you're looking for that particular information as it applies to you and your experience in the trial, I'd look for the contact at the site to start.
And I will add that for everyone who registered for the webinar, even if you weren't able to attend today, we'll be sending out a handout that includes a long list of the clinical trials that are open for histiocytic disorders, and it may not include all of them. So I still encourage you to do your own research as well, like Brenna mentioned, but we will share a long list for you with some explanations so that you can at least get started in seeing what's possible and what's out there.
Are there any other questions? I think we covered Marlene's question in the Q&A. And Marlene, I can actually get with you separately as well. And we'll send that email with the Office of Advocacy, like Brenna mentioned. We can put that in the follow-up email as well with the phone number in the email. So if we don't have any more questions, we'll just keep going and close up. So our resources are available to you at each of our websites. You can find a list of information on our slides. When we close out, you'll get all of this information in an email. So you'll have all access to all of this. So don't worry about taking pictures or writing anything down. So we'll go to our awareness slide, Kristen. And so we just want to point out that September is Awareness Month, and we want to encourage you to get involved in some way. Each of our organizations has activities going on in some way to get you involved, and we just encourage you to do that in some way, in some capacity, whatever time you have, whatever abilities you have to do that. Whether it's wearing the colors of your organization, wearing a ribbon, or going to an event, we just want you to try to do that, or try to encourage your family and your friends to do that as well, so that we can get as much awareness about as possible about histio disorders. So we thank you for helping us with that. And we will also provide our information, our contact information. If you have specific questions about today or anything at all, you can get with us individually. And as Deanna mentioned and Brenna mentioned, we'll get information to you. We have a great handout available about all the trials that are available for histio disorders. And Brenna had a great breakdown of how to look up clinical trials, because these things do change quite frequently. And I love how she broke down how to look these things up. It's very easy to do on clinicaltrials.gov. If you need help with that, again, your advocacy organizations are here for you, and we'll be happy to help you figure out how to do that on the phone or by email, however you need help. So just reach out to us that way. Please stay on to fill out a survey for us once you're done logging out from the webinar. These surveys help us to improve these educational webinars for us, so that we can do better for you guys and improve the topics, improve the content, and so forth. So we just need that help at the end. If you can take just a couple of minutes to fill those out for us, we'd really appreciate it. And as always, we appreciate your time and all that you do for us in your involvement with the community. So thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.